This is why I think it's the most ambitious show on television and one of the most interesting for making sort of politically salient points, in that it's offering a positive vision of the future, which is just not, or a positive vision of a different path to the present, which is not that common nowadays in our screen representations. And it's centered on people being better. And the mechanism is technological progress, but technological progress is often portrayed nowadays as a source of dystopia, not kind of elements of utopia. I'm Professor Stephen Dyson.
And I'm Professor Jeff Dudas.
And we are two political scientists who have just watched the first episode of Season 5 of For All Mankind, the Apple TV drama, an alternate history of the 1960s until, at this point, 2012. We're going to break down what happened in the episode, but perhaps more importantly, we're going to break down the political themes and ideologies that are present in this show, how they relate to our contemporary politics, and how this show, what could have been. Because that's the heart of this show, Jeff, and that's the thing I find most interesting and exciting about this show, is that it is, in each of its seasons, showing us a different period of contemporary history. Not only what could have been different and how it could have been different, but it has a fundamental orientation that things could have been better than they are today.
Yeah.
And that I find almost unique on television today.
Yeah, the structure of the show is consistent and has been consistent over the course of its 5 seasons. And that kind of backdrop of it, as you say, it's the alternate history. It's a show that is that's sourced in an alternate history of the space race, and then sort of spins out a variety of storylines and alternatives based upon the premise that the humans continue to go to the moon. Humans don't ever stop going to the moon. And then it sort of builds out from there. This appears to be a season that's going to be hyper-fixated on Mars.
So I think, sorry, not to interrupt you, I think that's super, super interesting. And I'm really, really excited about that, because Mars is being set up in this season to play a role that it recurrently plays in science fiction. So there are lots of stories of this type that employ Mars as sort of a mirror to Earth and an alternate to Earth, and commonly a sort of a site of a progressive revolution. So I think of something like, in particular, Kim Stanley Robinson's long social, political, and economic history of the development of an Earth colony on Mars, but then the development of a genuinely different socialist society on Mars. And I think that's in the background of For All Mankind at this point. Of course, the more recent TV series, The Expanse, came from a similar tradition and set Mars up as kind of an alternate to Earth and a challenge to Earth. And what usually happens in these stories is that the Martian outpost begins as sort of a colony. It's usually established for economic purposes. It's in an exploitative relationship with Earth. So structurally, what's being shown is the more classical relationship of the exploitation of the workers by the people who are already sort of in power. And as the colony grows, it develops its own political identity, its own social and economic identity. And eventually there's a revolution on the colony that not only establishes an independence from the imperial core from Earth, but also kind of infects Earth with its own ideas of a more egalitarian society.
Yeah, and it strikes me that there are some different types of Mars stories as well. I'm thinking, as you were talking, I was thinking of Total Recall, based on the Philip Dick story, which offers a pretty starkly different vision of Mars politics and the possibilities associated with Mars. Last season, season 4 For All Mankind, also was very focused on the development of the Mars colony, but it always set the development of Mars colony it nested it within what was happening on Earth. And I don't know, I mean, we'll see. I didn't get a lot out of the sort of the Earth stuff last night. And so I'm curious, what's happening on Earth.
I thought there was some.
There's some, but for example, I mean, NASA has been an omnipresent portion of this show. And in the early seasons, it was by far the dominant sort of institutional force with which we were confronted. There wasn't a single scene last night that even referenced NASA.
But hasn't it been in the mythology of the show? in its history, hasn't it been superseded by this M6, by this alliance of, the major spacefaring nations? So the Martian colony.
But how does the M6? I agree. Yes.
Yeah.
But the M6 has to have institutional homes.
Sure.
And so not only do we get nothing out of NASA, there's also nothing out of, is it Star
City,
the Soviet.
Yeah.
So maybe that stuff is coming. I don't know.
Well, because I think what's going on here is that Mars is being set up both in the text of the show and then the kind of extra textual elements. On the Apple TV website, there's additional of these kind of news breaks that fills in what happened between was it 2004? The last season ended in, it's 2012. This one begins in. Mars is being set up as an analog to Iraq, right? It's a similar time period. So in the extra stuff, Paul Bremer, who was actually the United States' first sort of plenipotentiary governor of Iraq, is also the governor of Mars. You get these MPK elements walking around the Martian colony, Martian peacekeepers, and so Mars is both. And
there's also the Abu Ghraib torture analog, right? And so throws back to the end.
Yeah, and so Mars is. It's not necessarily as directly an immediate NASA concern because it's grown into a project that's transnational. Although you could say, well, where's Star City? But is also beyond a mere space operation, right? It's a fully fledged. It holds the key, as far as I can tell, to the current Earth economy. And what's going on on Earth, is that. Two things. Economically, there's a tremendous amount of money is being sort of fronted to this mining operation on the promise of tremendous returns from the iridium that's in the kind of Goldilocks asteroid. And the economics of it are causing kind of inflation or debt crises on Earth, which are sort of analogs to the great financial crisis that happened in our time.
But I think it's an analog to a much earlier moment in history, in world history, which is to Spanish colonialism in the 1500s. This is the storyline of the Spanish crown forcibly extracting silver and gold out of the mines of the Americas, and again, coming into these kinds of eventually very lopsided and unequal relationships with a capitalist class of merchants in Spain who fronted the crown all this money to go out and, to continue these expeditions in the New World. And spoiler alert, it doesn't work out for the Spanish crown because what comes back is never enough for them to service their debt to their own emerging capitalist class, right? And so I do think here the analog, I do agree there's an Iraq war analog, but to the extent that we're talking about colonization and we're talking about sort of exploitive relationships between core and periphery, and to the extent that we're talking about the sort of detangled relationships between a central sovereign authority and a kind of shadowy semi-sovereign economic sort of wealth-based power, it's actually early European colonialism, which is, I think, maybe a stronger analog here.
Except the Iraq thing is Bremer is nowhere near as damaging on Mars as he was in Iraq, and the MKD, the peacekeepers they're sending around there, are not as violent as the actual experience of Iraq was,
right? And
the torture that takes place is nowhere near as horrifying as Abu Ghraib, which continues a consistent thing this show does, which is it will pick things that happen in our timeline, and if they happen at all, they happen in a less devastating or a more benign way. Not to get politically, but let's say you found Reagan a problematic political figure. Reagan still happens in For All Mankind, and he's still quite sort of aggressive and bellicose. But Reagan was also an idealist and a dreamer, and he had this kind of cinematic imagination. And in For All Mankind's universe, it's that side of him that's activated, and it actually becomes a progressive thing rather than a potentially sort of negative thing. So that's been a consistent thing that the show does. Other things that have gone on, I always find it interesting, this kind of history dump they do, both in the extra textual elements on the website, but at the start of each new season, a bunch of stuff happens. There's an Al Gore presidency, but he's defeated by Ellen Wilson's former vice president, what was he called? Jim Bragg. Jim Bragg. Al Gore's vice president is Paul Wellstone. There's a Gore Wellstone thing. Paul Wellstone was a progressive senator from Minnesota who died in a plane crash in our history. And was a sort of environmentalist and was regarded as sort of someone on the progressive edges of the Democratic Party.
Yeah.
So, and Gore was regarded as a centrist Democrat. And it kind of again shows how you get these real figures recurring, but that they're always pulled 2 or 3 ticks more in a progressive direction in this universe.
Right. Or they're just brought back to life, as in the case of Wellstone, but also JFK Jr., who's alluded to as a coming presidential candidate. So he also doesn't die. Also in a plane crash, which makes me wonder if there's sort of a subtle claim, that somehow the planes are better, they're safer, and which would fit with this sort of broader theme of, progress, as particularly technological progress.
Right. So just as in previous seasons, Chernobyl doesn't happen because they've got better nuclear technology, because they've been running these reactors on the moon and they've got different material. I hadn't thought of that. That's a really good point. Also not dead, John Lennon. Yes. He's still not dead.
He's collaborating with Jay-Z.
Collaborating with Jay-Z, which was awesome.
But this is a strange... I mean, let's just fixate on this for a minute. I don't want to go too far down the John Lennon rabbit hole, but this is a strange kind of move, I think, for the show to make. And we probably shouldn't make too much of it. It's probably just a cute little throwaway. But, I mean, John Lennon's assassination has nothing to do with obvious sort of political currents, right? It is, he's assassinated by a deranged superfan who blames Lennon for the breakup of the Beatles. And it's an odd locution, right? If you were going to save somebody from assassination, it seems to me there would be other figures it would make more sense to save them within the For All Mankind universe of technological progress. It's very unclear to me how Lennon fits into this sort of story, or a character like Lennon with those kinds of dynamics.
So I think there's a couple of possibilities, right? One is, as you say, it's just a cute thing. It's just a moment of, oh, I know that didn't happen. So it's showing you how once you start changing things in an alternate universe story, an alternate reality,
butterfly effect,
lots of things can change. And it's, if you were really into the metaphysics of this, you might say that it's become somewhat implausible that the butterfly effects wouldn't have grown greater than they are. Like, if the timeline changes that much, like, why is Al Gore still
right?
What's Gore's life like in the Up for the For Man? Is it really so similar? And the only thing that really changes is he wins the election rather than loses it. So you could make that metaphysical, but I think they might be making a more symbolic point with John Lennon, which is he was gunned down, and it was seen as a loss of the give peace a chance guy, and the utopian guy, and the peace, love, and happiness and type guy. And if that current continued to exist, would that have had its own positive effects, or would he continue to exist just because the society as a whole is less violent, is less sort of deranged, is less paranoid? If you remember the role Lennon played in previous of these seasons,
I don't.
History dumps. So at one point they have a news clip, characteristically sort of badly overdubbed from real footage, but they have a news clip where Lennon's
not taking full advantage of the AI.
Yeah,
video revolution.
Lennon's like, there is we can talk about this. There is a point about the show's aesthetics that I think bothers you a little more than me, but that Lennon says to about Ronald Reagan when he's president, come on, Nancy, tell Ronnie to go back to bed, grow his hair, and give peace a chance. And he sort of exerts this kind of popular cultural pressure on Reagan to be less bellicose. So there's that element. No Hurricane Katrina because there's no climate change.
Yeah.
I thought a nice callback to the fact that this is a world in which one of the central problems of our time, climate change, was just halted in the 1980s. And how do you continue to make that point or remind people of that point? There you go. There's that. And I'll shut up in a second about this kind of history dump thing. There's an Uhuru Robotics is alluded to. Uhuru, of course, being the communications officer from Star Trek. So there's that little nod. One thing I do think is really interesting about For All Mankind, and I'm interested to see if we will ever see it or if they're deliberately excluding it from this story, is that technology has advanced on many, many dimensions in this show, and you would imagine that it would therefore be a wave and all technologies would advance on those dimensions. They've still made no allusion at all to artificial intelligence, right? And it just seems that these were technologies that existed, in the 50s and 60s. These were the initial kind of advances in artificial intelligence. It's not like no one had thought of it before the timelines diverge, and you'd have thought if things were advancing that you would be seeing like large language models in this, unless what the point the show is making, I wonder if it is that these are not positive technologies, right? And so it's excluding them from its more positive future because it's seeing them in the present as dangerous or negative technologies. So you get robotics with Uhuru robotics, but there's no sense that you're getting the same kind of LLM or cognitive advances in artificial intelligence that you're getting in our time.
It's an interesting point. You may well be right. I don't know. I'm not sure that I would, at this point, read too much into that. It feels like it could be the same sort of, because you're right. There is a robotics sort of element, but we don't actually see much of it, right? I mean, it's a very
quite incipient,
human-centric show.
Exactly.
And in ways that actually it is not really all that consistent with the real history of Mars exploration, which has been done entirely by robots.
But I think the point you made is the salient point, right? That it's a human set, it's a humanistic show, right? It has a this is why I think it's the most ambitious show on television and one of the most interesting for making sort of politically salient points, in that it's offering a positive vision of the future, which is just not, or a positive vision of a different path to the present, which is not that common nowadays in our screen representations. And it's centered on people being better. And the mechanism is technological progress, but technological progress is often portrayed nowadays as a source of dystopia, not kind of elements of utopia. And I do think it's sort of a unique show for embodying those elements.
Yeah. Let's talk about the human-centric elements of it, because this is, so far we've spent a lot of time, I think, talking about the structural elements of the show, which I do agree are interesting. And they are very much they're the foundations of the show. You take those things away and what you're left with, in my opinion,
soap opera.
Is a soap opera. Right. And not a soap opera that's particularly interesting or well told, and certainly not
your view,
portrayed by characters who I find to be particularly compelling. Put that aside for a minute. The other thing, and you had alluded to this and something we talked about, I am surprised that this show doesn't look better on the screen than it does. You mentioned those sort of interstitial histories that are on the website, but also sort of contained within bits and pieces of the show. Like, those look bad. I mean, our YouTube videos look better than those do.
Wow. Except our faces are in them.
Well, it's a credit, I suppose, to your incipient editing skills. But I mean, I'm shocked at how bad some of this stuff looks. Like, Mars, in my opinion, does not look good. The colony doesn't look good. And you contrast these kinds of aesthetics, to other, prestige aiming TV shows. Let's go to Apple TV. Let's talk about Pluribus, for example. Pluribus looks extraordinary on the screen. It's an incredible looking show. It seems like what I've heard, what I've read, is that the budget for All Mankind is quite big. It's an expensive show to make. I don't know. I can't see on screen where the money is going. Like, the aging of Ed and Margot in particular, like, I get it. It's difficult to age actors and to make it look authentic. They don't even look close to it. I mean, it's obviously faked aging, which is also surprising given the sort of the advances in CGI and sort of video editing stuff. So I think the show looks bad.
I don't agree. I agree there's times when, particularly the new shots of, Al Gore saying, I just conceded to Jim Bragg and not, and you're like, yeah, I could see your mouth, you said George Bush. I mean, so I get it.
It doesn't even sound like Gore.
Sure.
They haven't even gotten the voice.
Which I agree is trivially easy to do with contemporary AI, although, maybe they're making a meta point that we don't have that AI and that we don't engage with it. It doesn't throw me out of the show. I think because I don't, that's not what's interesting to me. What's interesting to me is the ambition of the ideas. And so, the special effects were not good enough is sort of, to me, not a reason for not engaging with the ideas. And I remember something like, at some point you obviously have to suspend an element of disbelief or go on a leap in order to go with the story. I remember in Kim Stanley Robinson's Mars trilogy, widely regarded not only as a key work of science fiction, but also of sort of political theory, that he has this device of like an anti-aging treatment or something that allows people to live, hundreds and hundreds of years. And so you get the same characters again and again, who are the same people, and they have these treatments. And at first you're like, yeah, that's an obvious plot device. But then you have to kind of, and it seems a bit Hawking, it's a bit hand-wavy how it all works. And that can definitely throw you out of the thing. But then what you realize he's doing is that these characters they're not really meant to be real people. They're standing in as for ideas or for the notion of human consciousness across different historical epochs. And they're important as frames of reference to allow you to understand the kind of swirl of social and political change around them. So I suppose I just have a higher threshold before it would throw me out.
But do you think that's what these characters are? Because I don't. I think they're trying to tell human stories here in line with what we were talking about earlier, is the human-centric elements of the show. I just think at this point, the stories that they're telling are about these particular types of characters are not very compelling.
So I also don't agree. But I think what they're trying to do, I think the methodology of the show is intended to be empowering, okay? And it's intended to show you that significant changes can happen in the macro direction of societies within the course of human lifetimes, and can often be materially impacted by, the things that individuals do within their lifetime. And so we're all sort of agentic actors. We're not just subject to unchangeable human natures or pre-selected deterministic developments, which is a major divergence between different philosophies of macro and micro politics. And so it's showing you the lived experiences of these people in ways that are both quotidian and profound, and saying that there's not actually a big divergence between the two. So I think it is important to follow someone like Ed Baldwin, however difficult it becomes to square the physical age and appearance of Joel Kinnaman with the age and appearance of Ed Baldwin, particularly in the last two seasons. And I agree, it's difficult, right? You have to squint a bit and squint more than Ed Baldwin in all that makeup to get through it. But it is important to look at the Korean War veteran who tortures a person, who's an awful dad, who completely mistreats his wife and son, who tortures a Soviet cosmonaut in Cold War 1960s, and to then see him as what I think is a kind of proto-Marxist revolutionary on Mars in 2012. And it's important that's the same guy within a human lifetime.
Yeah, but ironically, I mean, I think that Ed Baldwin is by far the most successful character in this show at this point, precisely because of this kind of character growth and transformation over time, as stark as it seems to be. I thought he was clearly the highlight of season 4. I suspect he'll probably be the highlight of season 5 for me as well. But I mean, it'll be interesting. I mean, I'm hopeful that what we're going to see in the next couple of episodes is a return to focus on some of the few interesting characters who were introduced last year, who I think deserve more time, like the new head of the Soviet Space Agency. I found her to be a pretty interesting and compelling character. I hope that we see more of her going forward. I hope that we get something out of NASA. Like, I mean, I find it hard to believe that they simply are irrelevant, right, at this point. So, and I'm hopeful that we'll see some meaningful development from Dev, and not just, another cover of Men's Health in a different pose. Because I do think they're developing a storyline that might be interesting there about like the conflicts between sort of the running Helios on Earth and the shareholders, and whatever Dev the Visionary is doing on Mars.
Yeah, I want to take a quick break, and then I want to come back and just talk about some of what I think are the storylines that are being set up for this season, and maybe some of the new characters that we're introduced to. And we are back, so we wanted to talk about a few of the storylines that we see having been set up in that first episode and that we think are obviously going to get paid off over the rest of the season. I know one concern you had was that a lot of the characters you felt in the last season had kind of run their course and so forth, and I had that concern as well. My view is that it's a really good idea to have introduced the the sort of new generation of what are effectively the grandchildren. Certainly it's Ed's grandson, Alex Baldwin, crucially not Alec Baldwin, which like, I think clearly someone put their hands up in the writer's room and said, hang on, what's this guy called?
This is an interesting point. I actually want to, let's spend some time on this because I do think it will be interesting to see the way that the show treats the grandchildren of the sort of the patriarchal families, as opposed to how it treated the children, which was horrendously. In both of the,
like Danny Stevens and
right. The Stevens family kids are, one of them becomes a terrorist. The other one, like, just spirals out of control and is eventually literally left for dead on Mars.
Which was the one that had that weird affair with Ed's wife?
That's Danny.
Okay.
Yeah.
That was the strangest moment.
Then you get the treatment of the biological child, right? The Baldwin son from the first season. Like,
that was horrific.
So
but that was making a point about Ed and his development. And the development of the nuclear family structure in America.
I have a broader point here.
Go ahead.
Which is that, like, these are boomers, treating their Gen X kids terribly, or the Gen X kids were really getting the short end of the stick. And it's the generation after, it's the grandchildren's generation who become sort of elevated as the sort of the golden children in the eyes of the grandparents. And that is one way, arguably, in which what we're seeing on screen is consistent with what this is not an alternate history, actually, in that way. And so I will be interested to see how this new generation of grandchildren are treated by the show. I have a suspicion that they are going to be treated very, very well indeed, in ways that create a stark contrast to the way that the actual children were treated. And I also have a suspicion that in so doing, Ed Baldwin, for example, will be redeemed as a paternal figure.
Oh, yes, I'm very sure.
If he hasn't already.
I'm very sure that that's where they're going. That the one thing I was going to say was dramatically, I think the introduction of that generation gives to me anyway a new life to the show, and there's sort of energy just about them. How much can you watch Ed and Margot shambling around and just the fact that they sort of run rather than stumble is not to be ageist or whatever, but it did give a bit of vitality to the show and their interactions. But I think more importantly and more seriously, obviously Mars is going to come to represent a more egalitarian energy. It seems pretty clear to me that there's going to be some sort of revolution on Mars. Clearly, they're going to try and take further control of the resources that they captured at the end of the fourth season, but that are now still being shipped back to Earth. And clearly, that's going to redound upon Earth politics, because they're going to try and break the M6 cartel monopoly. And they're going to start negotiating with this alternate group of less wealthy nations for access to the iridium, and it's going to set an example of egalitarianism on Mars, led by these grandchildren who are children of Mars, who have started to form a different identity that's not only shaped by an earthbound heritage, and then that's going to lead to a positive political change on Earth. So I think that I hope that's going to be really, really interesting. Kelly Baldwin, it keeps looking for life. This was alluded to in previous seasons, and she's back on that beat. There's one more season of this show. I mean, my suspicion is that one of the finale things of the whole show is going to be they'll find. I don't think they're going to find
bacteria. They'll find
exactly. I don't think. Yeah, but even that would fundamentally reorient and open human horizons. It would be the biggest discovery in the history of the species. So that's going to be really interesting, I think. And then more broadly, we're going to have this kind of colony versus sender politics sort of played out.
Yeah, periphery core.
Yeah, periphery core stuff. So does any of that grab you, or do you retain concerns?
We'll see.
Okay.
I retain concerns until
proven otherwise.
Yeah.
All right, good. Well, I think it's very interesting, Jeff, and we commonly have quite closely aligned views on things, and it's quite interesting to see that. I think I'm a little higher on on this at the moment than you are, although I think you're still sort of open-minded and so forth. As am I. I mean, this could crater, to use a metaphor from the show, this could crater very quickly. And, you know, season 4 was a bit problematic towards the end. I felt more of an uplift or a jolt of energy from the start of season 5. So I'm sort of back on board for this. Yeah. But if you have thoughts either on what we've said in this video, or what you think of the show overall, where it's going, what its politics are, how it's relating and retelling our contemporary history, we'd love to see them. We'd love to interact in the comments. We try and respond to every comment that we get. And we will be back here. Do I have you on board, Jeff, for a good episode 2, yes, same time next week?
Yes.
So we will be back here with another video next week. And on that bombshell,